And welcome back, everybody, to the podcast as we continue our discussion, our series, if you will, on one-dimensional man.
Yes, comrade.
Yes, comrade. Yes, comrades. Yes, gentle comrades.
Gentle comrades. Exactly.
Today. And yeah, this is good. This has been a really fun series so far. Jim, I thank you for proposing this.
Appreciate
I think it's a wonderful point of contrast to the series we just did on Plato's Republic. So let me begin with just a few announcements before we dive in here. First, I just want to say that we are going to do, because some people were concerned, we are going to do Aristotle's Ethics and Politics.
Yeah. And I think in conjunction as they were intended.
As they were intended. So we're going to do that next. We have some other series lined up. Of course, welcome to hear your recommendations as well. Yeah. And that was my only announcement. Jim,
I mean, just think of where maybe this is best left off air, but here we are, right? It's like where philosophy for the people is going. So we're going to have a 10-parter on Plato's Republic, right? Mm-hmm. Then we're going to have a 10-parter on one-dimensional man. We're going to have how many parts on ethics and politics as Aristotle's ethics and politics as a whole? Like, I mean, this is gonna become like a pretty significant philosophy curriculum read along.
This is the revolution. This is
here it is. Yeah, exactly.
And it's not being televised, but it is being YouTubed.
It is being YouTubed. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it strikes me that we're kind of chipping away at something pretty damn big here.
Right. And that's how big. And that's how. Yeah, absolutely. And that's how big things are built. One bird by bird, one small step at a time.
Yep.
So, actually, one more announcement. Jim was on a Classical Theist podcast lately.
Indeed, I was.
And that was an excellent interview. So I just want to tell people to go check that out. It was based off of Jim's recent paper. I forget the title of it, but it's playing that game that we always find ourselves playing again, the Bayesian tennis.
Bayesian tennis. Yeah, I tell you, it's a paper I wrote on the distribution of suffering in the natural world, right? So it's a problem evil paper, and I tell you, John from Classical Theism is a great interlocutor. He really is, and I really enjoyed talking to him. And when I gave listened to a couple parts of the podcast yesterday, I was very happy with his questions and where he pushed me. And I also say, if I may, I think that podcast is a pretty good introduction to some basic philosophy of mind too.
It is. Yeah, it definitely is. Because you at least, that's right. That's what I wanted to announce. I didn't ask you if this was cool first, but I assume it is. We are going and must do a basic intro to philosophy of mind podcast. We have to do that, right?
Yeah, we will. Just in terms of vocabulary building kind of thing, right? Like what are the positions? And
all right. So that will be coming up. Okay, let's go to Marcuse. So over to you, Jim. Yeah.
All right, Marcuse. So we are reading
One-Dimensional Man, Chapter 2.
One-Dimensional Man, Chapter 2. And as always, right, I begin by referring us to the table of contents, right? And so here we are. We did Chapter 1, which is the new forms of social control. And today we read Closing of the Political Universe. And note the title of the book is The One-Dimensional Man. The first section of the book is The One-Dimensional Society, right? And so now what we're getting is through these 4 chapters in that section is how a one-dimensional society got built. And let's remember the context of this is, Marcuse is a Marxist of some sort, right? But he's this critical theory Marxist, so he's a latecomer on the scene. There's this big question of, if the revolution was inevitable, why didn't it happen, right? Why is it, already in the 60s looking like the victory of the Soviet Union, the Cold War, is not inevitable, right?
Yep.
Right. So there's major questions about like kind of Marxist fundamentals that need to be asked.
Yeah. Right? So let's highlight that, because I think that's really important, because people are like, well, critical theory, critical race theory, this just is Marxism. Now it is an extension of it for sure, but it's important to understand that Marcuse himself was highly critical of Marx, of old school Marxism, right? And he's critical because he says, like, look, this made a number of predictions that have completely failed, right? Just a bunch of failed predictions. However, at the same time, because somebody might wonder, well, if you're that critical of it, then why do you even call yourself a Marxist? Why do you? and he is a Marxist, right?
Yeah. Of some description,
and I was actually just trying to do, more biography on the guy, and I was watching an interview with him. It was a fascinating interview.
Yeah.
And this got brought up, and he essentially says, he just thinks that the core of the theory is still good. He's like, we have to, and it goes to show like how flexible theories can be, right? Like it's really hard in like political and worldview theories to like completely cancel out a theory like all at once, right? Because theories can always be modified, they can always be adjusted, they can always undergo
Aristotle's the greatest Neoplatonist.
Right, yeah, various permutations. So Marcuse is very critical of what came before him in Marxism, but he still thinks that the kernel, if you will, is correct enough that now he's trying to breathe sort of new life into it. So I just wanted to get that context.
And like, what's the kernel is that there's this and this is like where he's allied to Marx is where I think Marcuse has gone wrong, right? As you can tell from what we talked about, there's a lot I like about this guy, right? But and not just for like the picnic picture on the back of the book, right? But that's worth it.
These guys, man, it's always so romantic.
Exactly. Anyway, so is like there's this, and actually James Lindsay is pretty good on this too, right? Is there's this like spooky alchemy of the self here. Like, you think of like alchemy's idea, if you could just take your iron or your lead and peel back enough layers, there was inner gold there, right? And so just like the gold was in there waiting to be liberated out, and it would just be awesome to liberate it, right? And he has this view, like this is like the thing like people miss about Marxism in a lot of ways. Like the real root claim for Marx is that if we just got these like bad social structures out of the way of the human individual, right? Then the human individual would just open up and flower into this like really just beautiful, free and self-reliant, and like no need of a state or anything, right? Like really like would just jump right into where everybody would be an aristocrat in Aristotle's ideal society, right? You know what I mean? And I like that metaphor of alchemy for it, because it's the assumption that like humans don't need an external social structure, right, in order for them to flourish. And in fact, social structure gets in the way of it, right?
Yes, right.
And so it's Rousseau. It's like all of this stuff is warmed over Rousseau, right? And like that Marcuse shares with Marx is that if we just got society right, and what would mean to get society right would be to get rid of any external structure, then we would have a paradise on earth, right?
Yeah. And now Marcuse he's critical of Marx on I think a number of points that are going to be related to that. One is he did think Marx was insufficiently attentive to the individual as such.
Yes,
is one of his major criticisms, right?
Yes, and that's what he learned from Freud.
Right. And that's the second one is he says, and he doesn't fault Marx for this because Freud came after, but Marcuse is a huge fan of Freud, right? Yes. So he's like, it's not Marx's fault he didn't have our boy Freud here, but we got Freud now, so we need to incorporate this. But but part of that is a general criticism that he has of a sort of empirical ignorance of Marxism as well, right?
And so this is really important, right? Okay, really good homework in there. That's cool, right? So, so Marcuse, is a Marxist, but he's also deeply influenced by Freud, and he actually studied with Heidegger for a while. Okay, which is weird because Heidegger is no Marxist, right? Right. Okay, so what does Marcuse take from those two thinkers? And this is directly germane to this chapter, right? Is with Freud, right? He's got a sense of this notion of sublimation that you don't find in Marx, right? It's implicit. There's like this suspicion of the superstructure, in light of the substructure of Marx, but it's not down to the individual consciousness being deceived about what it really is that you have in Freud, right? So in Freud, the ego, right, is just this artificial construction, right, that's mediating between the superego, which is the external societal influence, and the id, which is like the inner human self, which is like ugly and nasty. Okay. Now, Marcuse likes that, but he thinks the inner human self isn't this ugly, nasty id. It's like this beautiful flower child hippie, right? Okay, but he does,
and real just quick, he needs to make these adjustments to Freud because Freud and Marxism by themselves actually don't play well together.
They don't play at all,
and Marcuse realizes this, so he does need to kind of like craft them each independently to get this marriage to happen. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like he's got a Marxist critique of Freud. Like Freud thinks the inner self is this nasty, aggressive, competitive id, because Freud's been like too wrecked by capitalism, so that he interprets everything in terms of nasty, aggressive. So it's pretty cool. He Freud's Freud. Right, like he sees Freud as like the sublimation of the capitalist society that he was in. Right, I mean, look, that's a move. Right? Right?
It's a move, man.
He caught Freud in a triangle, right?
Yeah, right. He did.
Okay, and so he takes that from Freud, is that notion of how the superego sublimates the desires of the id in a way that becomes our sense of self, our ego, right? Okay, fair enough, right? Okay, and Freud, and you don't have that as explicit in Marx, right? And he learns it from Freud. Also, Marx, and this comes up in the chapter today, Marx just thought, hey, Marx is not critical of technology, right? Like Marx just sees the question isn't whether or not we should be mechanized. It's just who owns the machine.
That's exactly right. And this chapter is big on the fact that, look, we're really going to liberate technology, right?
Yeah.
We're going to liberate.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, for Marx, there's no sense that we would be liberated from technology. It's just that we got to get the machine out of the bourgeois man's hands and into the hands of the proletariat. And then we're going to have paradise. Okay.
Right.
He doesn't mistrust the machine. Right. He doesn't mistrust modern technological lifestyles. Right.
Yeah.
In a way, in the same way. Right. Okay. And this is what Marcuse is getting from Heidegger. Right. Is that mistrust of the machine itself. Is like seeing the machine is ultimately not just a neutral tool for humanity to use, but something that will consume humanity too.
Yeah.
Right. And there too, I think that's hard to disagree with. Right. Okay. So he has that. And then there's the fact that the revolution didn't happen. Right. Okay.
Right. And
we talked about in the previous chapter, new forms of social control. That's basically the Freudian chapter. It's on the sublimation, right, of the BS values into restructuring the self. Okay. In this chapter, it's about how we get a one-dimensional politics, right? Like I forget the exact title of the chapter is the closing of the political universe, right?
Right.
And I think this right here is tough for us to get because we've grown up, I'm sorry, I know we have an international audience, but like a lot of us in America have grown up in a fairly monolithic political environment, even though we're constantly told how divided it is, right? And we don't get so like what someone like Marcuse is saying is like in the closing of the political universe is like he doesn't see that there really is a serious choice between the two major political parties in America today. Like he's writing mainly for American audience, right? Because he sees like you don't have a serious proletariat labor party in the way you did have these kinds of parties in the 1930s in America. Like you had legit communist parties, right?
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Right. Okay. Where the labor was not working together with management in the best way to go forward and negotiate a deal, where labor was like, we're going to smash you. Right. And he's like, that's gone. Like you don't have real that's like, it's not really opposition. It's like everybody's on the capitalist team. It's just, how can we make everybody the most comfortable along for that ride? Right.
Yeah.
And so that's what he wants to talk about. Like why, because the Marxist needs that opposition for a revolution to happen. Right. And you don't have that kind of opposition anymore. Right?
Yeah.
And you think of it too, like how, when I was a kid, right. The Democratic Party, at least the surface story, was the party of the working person, right? Of the flyover country was Democrat country, right? In my lifetime, that's been inverted.
Right.
Been completely inverted, right? Do you see that? Okay. And not everybody realizes yet, but you can, and this is something that Marcuse would say, yeah, because it's really all just different degrees of our servitude to the machine. Right?
That's right. Yeah. There's a good paragraph here I wanted to just highlight real quick. He says, its supreme promise is an ever more comfortable life for an ever-growing number of people who, in a strict sense, cannot imagine a qualitatively different universe of discourse and action, for the capacity to contain and manipulate subversive imagination and effort is an integral part of that given society. He continues, for the other, less underprivileged people, society takes care of the need for liberation by satisfying the needs which make servitude palatable and perhaps even unnoticeable. And it accomplishes this fact in the process of production itself, right? So, talking about sort of the creative genius of the capitalist system there, right?
And he's going after LBJ there. He's going
Mhm.
after the Great Society. Like in the last part of this, you have the welfare state and the warfare state, right?
Right. Yes.
And it's not lost on Marcuse as he's writing this in the run up to Vietnam.
Oop. Jim, freeze up.
You got me? Am I there yet?
You're back.
Back. Cool.
Your audio. Okay. Yeah, you're fully back. Good.
Cool.
Yeah. So welfare state and warfare state was the last
so
thing I heard from
keep
you.
in mind, like this was published in 64, right? So already we're ramping up to Vietnam as we're ramping up the Great Society too, right? And so like and this is not lost on people like Marcuse, like the very people who are claiming that are developing the welfare state are also like rounding up the same people that are supposedly going to be the recipients of the benefits of the welfare state and sending them to Vietnam, right? And he's saying like you can't separate these two things, right? And so it's interesting, like once again, this shows how much I think contemporary lefties don't get their own canonical texts, right?
Yeah, they really
you
don't.
See in the welfare state, something like the Great Society, it's just a payoff for your service in genocidal warfare.
Right? Yeah, it's funny. The people who would be most likely to, I think, resonate with what Marcuse is saying right now would be the rightest of the libertarians.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like those would be the people, like if they were reading this without knowing the author, at least up to this part, they probably be like, oh yeah, this must be some great anarcho-capitalist writing this, right?
Or like I think Viking helmet guy would love this if he just didn't know it was a Marxist writing it.
Right. Yeah. Now we haven't got to the second half of the book yet, but at least the diagnosis and the problems, right? Yeah.
And there's some stuff in this in this chapter too that's pretty damn scary, right?
Right.
But because here's the thing, is like he's saying, and this is the scary part, is the revolution is all or nothing. There's no kind of revolution. Revolution's got to be qualitative change. So it has to be based on a qualitatively different opposition, right? And so what he's saying is, look, nothing changes until you even have the collapse of the welfare state, right? Like administrative capitalism has to go and the welfare state has to go. We have to like wreck the whole thing. But the problem is we don't have a party that's willing to like talk that way. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And it's all UBI. It's all handout, right? In exchange for your complacency in his view.
Yes. Right. Yep. It's all got to go. Right. I mean, which again is like very much a theme that you do see in anarcho-capitalists. I mean, like Rothbard was big on this. He's like, look, if I could just hit the button and make it all go, like the detonation button of our entire, like I'm hitting it. Like the first thing in charge, boom, boom, boom. Right.
Yeah. And so like the way someone like Marcuse sees the welfare state is, you would say, look, like what we're doing is we're saying, yeah, we're gonna give you food stamps, and we're gonna give you maybe access to cheap student loans, and we're gonna give you all these like small level
iPhones, right?
iPhone, yeah, whatever. We're gonna give you all these little things, but they're not liberating you from the system that has put you in a position where you're a dependency on someone else.
They're just placating your actual deeper need for liberation. Right? Yeah. It's like dope. It's like doping a horse. Right?
Yeah. And I really like the metaphor. What's going on in the 60s? We're going to draft you to go to Vietnam, right? And then come back, and what do we have for you? Mostly we have for you, various levels of welfare. Right.
Yeah. We got a job. We got a job for you at the post office, and
exactly.
And some welfare.
Yeah. Exactly.
Some stimmy checks. Yeah.
Some stimmy checks. Right. You can go to Iraq and you can get your stimmy check. Right. You know what I mean? Like, and so
apparently you can just sit at home and get your stimmy checks.
Yeah. That's the point of the problem too. Right. Okay. And so he's seeing these two things as two sides of the same coin. Okay. Right now, whatever we think about that, that's one thing. Right. But another thing is, I just think once again, it just shows how far off from actually being revolutionary our modern faux revolutionaries are.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Like if you're revolutionary, say, I don't want your damn check, you bourgeois scumbag. Right. You know what I mean? That's what you'd be saying. Right.
Right.
But that's not what they're doing. Right. So what's the real motivation behind this? It's not the revolution. It's the opposite.
Right.
It's the new form of social control.
He would not be satisfied. Marcuse would not be with just getting woke ideology in corporations. That's not the revolution.
In fact, I think if you were here today, he would say that once again just shows the cunning of the capitalist reason, right?
Right. Yeah. It's just already one step ahead. How do you think he would feel about that great nation, the sovereign country of Chaz?
Yeah.
Jim?
Well, that would be an interesting thing, right? Because those guys said,
we're out.
We're out, right? Like, yeah, I think that's more like what Marcuse has in mind, right? Okay, and there's a spooky line in here where he quotes Rousseau, where like, if you're not down with this, we'll have to like help you be free and put you on the highway of what you really want. I mean, like that's
right. Yeah.
So what happened at Chaz? What was the name of the self-appointed head of Chaz?
Well, I forget who's the king or queen.
Yeah, he had some like funky name, right? It's like, hey, like Moonbeam will make you free with his AK-47. He's walking around in Chaz. Okay, so once again, we're not saying like we like his positive vision, but I think he would have a great diagnosis of the hypocrisy of the so-called left today.
Yes,
right?
Of course,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And so, okay, so then like the main structure of the chapter is him going through these 4 points of why he thinks like real social change has been contained, right? Because you can see like they really thought, these Marxist types really thought the Depression was it, man. Like this is tipping off the revolution, right? And especially when like then the Nazis like lose in World War II, right? So like now it looks like, hey, we're gonna like infiltrate the universities with Marxists, all this stuff. It's all gonna happen, and it doesn't happen, right? And so he gives us his 4 points in this chapter of what closed the political universe, right? So why there's no qualitative change available. It's all only just quantitative different levels of capitalism.
Right. So he's really trying to explain why the prediction failed, right?
Why the prediction failed, and like what's like structurally blocking it, right? So he goes through these 4. So I'm on page 24, right? The first one he says is its mechanization is increasingly reducing the quantity and intensity of physical energy expended by labor, right?
Work gets easier.
Work's getting easier, yeah. I mean, so technology has made work easier, right? But I think there's something, and partly we have to say, and is that a bad thing? No, of course not, right? But also then on 25, I like some of his follow-ups on how he spells this out. So on the top of 25, he says, now the ever more complete mechanization of labor is advanced capitalism, while sustaining exploitation modifies the attitude and the status of the exploited. Within the technological ensemble, mechanized work in which automatic and semi-automatic reactions fill the larger part, if not the whole of labor time, remains as a lifelong occupation, exhausting, stupefying, inhuman slavery, even more exhausting because of increased speed up control of the machine operators rather than the product and isolation of the workers from each other. Okay. So, I mean, just think of it is like, yeah, like we don't work the back-breaking hours that our like grandfathers did, but do we work fewer hours? We don't. Like in all the evidence would show, like with the advance of technology, we are actually working more hours. Do you know what I mean? And just think of like how it's like by digitizing your workplace, right? And so now you can like. I remember this was a big deal in the early 2000s. People are just shocked now where I'm expected to answer emails from my boss on a Saturday night, right? Whereas like before that, your boss wouldn't call you up on a Saturday night and demand work from you, right? Do you know what I mean? So what's happening is, yeah, the work is qualitatively less difficult, right? But the amount of it expected of us actually goes up quantitatively, right? Because it's less physically difficult. Did you see that, right? And so are we liberated by this or are we further captured by this, right? Well, Marcuse says we're further captured by it, right? And I don't think that's a groundless claim, right? Right.
Yeah, yes, no, I mean, I haven't looked at the stats over the past 50 years, but it seems not only quite plausible, but I mean, we know just more people have been entering the workforce as well. I mean, especially women, right? Especially women.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Right.
And now look, I'm a professor. I work 14 hours a week. Okay. So I can't complain, but all right. So second point of what's holding so is the working class less pissed off than it was in the 1930s? Yes. Right. Okay. Is it any more liberated? Marcuse would say it's more comfortable, but it's actually less liberated than it was, right? Because increasingly your free time is more filled with like this intrusion of work by technology, and the kind of work you're doing, you have less control over it because it's more mediated by machines that are completely uniform, and you're making fewer decisions, and you're just like checking the boxes on the spreadsheet, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Now, the second point of what's keeping the one-dimensional politics in place is, I'm on page 27. Excuse me. The assimilating trend shows forth in the occupational stratification. In the key industrial establishments, the blue-collar workforce declines in relation to the white-collar element.
Mm-hmm.
The number of non-production workers increases. Okay, and he goes on. So basically what he's saying is, look, there are fewer people doing what, I mean, like literally we quit making people dress like blue-collar workers, right, in their jobs. We've let people have the external trappings of being bourgeois,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, they get to wear a tie to work now, or I guess a sports shirt, right?
Right.
But Marcuse would say, are they any more in control of what is going on at the workplace? Do they have any greater say in what the product is and how it's made and all that? They don't. Right? Do you see that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying is like we've let people feel like they're middle class, that they're bourgeois, right, by letting them have the external trappings of being a manager, but for the most part, they're not managers. They're just throwing switches on the machine, right?
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So third point that he makes, I'm on page 29.
Yep.
These changes in character of work and the instruments of production change the attitude and the consciousness of the laborer, which become manifest in the widely discussed social and cultural integration of the laboring class with capitalist society. Okay, so what he has in mind here is, like the super rich and the working class now, or the rich and working class, they're watching the same TV shows,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
At least in his time, like you didn't have to be terribly wealthy to go to a Yankees game, right? So you could have, the president of Chase Manhattan Bank sitting next to one of the like assistant mailroom guys at the same game, right? Okay, so once again, because of like the availability of easy consumables to everyone, it gives everyone the illusion that we're all on par here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, even think today, I mean, take like us and Bill Gates now.
Yeah.
We could speculate a lot about Bill Gates, but let's just
yeah, right.
But I mean, for the most part, probably watching the same TV shows, probably looking at the same iPhone, probably have similar enough refrigerators, right?
Yeah.
I don't know about his refrigerator. Now, of course, he's got a lot of stuff, more stuff, and the ability to do other stuff that most of us don't. But like, unlike in the broad sweep, one could get the impression that we're not. It's not the difference anymore between some like royal king and some lowly peasant, right? Yeah.
And of course it's like BS. So like, let's say, you and I, because we're these cultural elites, right? We do an endorsement for, a coffee company, right? And so then, the poor plebes could say, hey, I could be just as royal as Pat and Jim if I just because they drink coffee X. Right. And they're royalty. I'm royalty too, right?
Right.
But it's all we just lowered the bar. That's all that happened, right?
Yeah. It's like thinking that we have anywhere near as much influence as somebody like Gates because we scroll through the same iPhone or something like
that. Exactly.
Now, he's probably not an Apple guy, but I don't know.
Yeah, probably not. I don't. I bet behind the scenes he is, right? Yeah. I would be surprised, right? Okay.
This is just a better product.
It's just a better product. Okay, so the fourth and final point, right? I'm on page 31.
Right.
The new technological work world thus enforces a weakening of the negative position of the working class. The latter no longer appears to be the living contradiction to the established society. And it's really a summary, right?
Yeah.
It's like, whereas in the 30s, the working class was living in negative contradiction to the people that were running things, right?
Yeah.
And now Marcuse is saying it's no different. But through these like mechanisms, we've been given the appearance that there is only a qualitative change between us and the people running our lives, only a quantitative. We're all kind of just a different degree sharing in the same set of goods and stuff like that. And it gives us the illusion of a freedom that we don't have, right? Okay. And that's why he thinks that within the basic structure of like American political culture, there isn't a real choice, right?
Yeah.
They're just different degrees of what he sees as oppressive capitalism.
Yeah,
Right.
he would take the Jesse Ventura sort of diagnostic, right? He's
Yeah,
gonna be
or
like, look,
Steve Bannon.
he's like, look, if you think there's a choice, really, you don't understand that this is just all professional wrestling. They pretend to hate each other. They're actually
Yeah.
all ultimately on the same team, and what they really hate is when you get annoying, right?
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
and then they're all going out and enjoying their wine together, behind the scenes and whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I mean, this is probably show where I'm coming from. I've listened to some very interesting interviews from Steve Bannon recently, and I tell you, it sounds like Marcuse in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
It sounds a lot like Marcuse, right? Where it's like, he'll talk about, in 2008 with the bank bailouts, right? Where, the very people who caused this got paid off for this, right?
Right. Which is why you've seen so many people who were very far left kind of like team up with the guy who wears the Viking horns.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Like they've realized like,
Yep.
oh yeah, we're all kind of being
Yep.
played here. Right. And
Yeah.
Even though we might have completely different visions of how things should be run,
Yeah.
it seems like we agree that we're all getting played. Right.
It's Tim Pool. It's Tim Pool, right?
Mhm.
And this is where I think like traditionalist organicist views of society, probably like what you and I hold, right? And like completely lefty, like, kind of recovering anarchist, right? Guys like Tim Pool can like see common political cause, right?
Yeah.
Because we both kind of see what Marcuse is seeing here. I take it, right? Is that the whole thing is like structured to conspire against opposition against it in a very soft, palpable way. Right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, we can get into the Q&A, but again, I think this is where religion and theology and greater metaphysics actually helps in significant ways, that somebody like Marcuse is going to have those resources, right? Like if you're looking at this through a particular paradigm that allows other powers and principalities, right? And also has a particular human anthropology, right? I think we can agree a lot on what the issues are, but we'll come at it from why those issues are there, and certainly what the solutions are, right? Yeah.
And it's interesting is, I think, on like the actual historical person Marcuse's side of this, right? There's a kind of magical thinking that's going on here. This kind of alchemy that's going on here, where like, hey, if we just knocked down, because he's talking like we're just going to knock the system down, like the whole system's got to be knocked down, right? And it turns out the system's resistance to being knocked down is more subtle than Marx envisioned, but still the solution is knock the system down. Right. And then just by some kind of like magic of like the true inner human nature will be great. It'll and that's magical thinking.
Right. It is. And it like that is somebody
kind of
that is somebody who doesn't take seriously the doctrine of original sin.
Yeah. Or he doesn't take Plato's, thinking back to the Republic, he doesn't take Plato's point that the reason we need politics in the first place is this inevitable human, like sick desire to do better, right?
Right. Yeah.
To not stay in your lane and do better than the other guy, right? And it's always going to be conflict and warfare and all that stuff. So we need an order, that like an external order to ourselves to keep that thing in place, right?
Right.
And so I think that's where I think you're right, Pat. Like we need, ultimately, I'm with Plato, because Plato is ultimately giving you a kind of theology, right?
Yes.
We need a kind of theology ultimately, so we don't just fall back on alchemical, like wishful thinking, right? In our politics, is which I think what you end up with someone like Marcuse.
Yeah. And which of course can result in body counts in the hundreds of millions.
It can result in result in body counts in the hundreds of millions. And it's interesting to like as soon as Lenin actually pulls off the revolution, right? And like the state's supposed to go away, right? But he realized he can't get away from the state. He's like, aha, well, it turns out Marx was wrong. I'm not a Marxist, I'm a Leninist now, right? Okay. And we're going to need a state to run things. And guess what? He's right. Okay, we need some external structure, right? Okay,
right. Turns out that you cannot have a community without that external structure. You cannot have a community without a government. You just cannot, right?
And and I don't mean like we're not even halfway through the book, so there's much more to learn from this book. But what we're philosophizing, right?
Yep.
So what happens, with Marcuse? Like he gets his culture of liberation for its own sake in the 1960s counterculture, right? Okay, and what happens? Like the complete liberation of the individual does not go well, right? Like I think if you ever want to like do a great exercise in film, right? Watch the original documentary about Woodstock, okay? Which is what is that? That's summer '67.
Yeah, about that, right?
Okay, right. And then watch the documentary called "Gimme Shelter," right? Which was where the Rolling Stones wanted to have Woodstock 2 on the West Coast. So they rented the Altamont Speedway, just basically throw a Woodstock. Okay.
Right.
And they hired the Hells Angels to do security. How's this end? Not good, right? Okay. So what you see in that documentary made by the counterculture is the counterculture realizing the counterculture is itself cannibalistic and self-consuming and does not end in this like alchemic like fantasy world. It ends in like violence and degradation, right? Do you see what I mean?
Right. Which is a sort of prediction that a particular theological worldview would make, right?
Would make, yeah. And then what happens is the counterculture becomes a commercialized parody of itself, and Levi starts selling bell bottoms, right? right. Okay. And Ford starts marketing cars to hippies, and Volkswagen cashes in the Volkswagen bus thing and all that. So all the liberation did was just make us all the more grist for the capitalist mill, right?
Yeah. So in case you guys thought we were getting a little too friendly with Marcuse, there you go. Right.
Yes.
Right. We're just trying to be fair is all, right? Yeah.
But I think we're applying a lesson that we've learned from Marcuse to Marcuse.
And from our previous series on Plato. So trying to tie it all together. Very good. Should we take some questions here, Jim?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's rock and roll. All right. Andrew's got a number of comments.
Man, we really stuck it to the man there. Yeah.
Dude, man. This is the revolution. All right, Andrew. I'm sorry. Looks like your comments are out of order here. So let me do the best.
You're out of order, sir.
Yeah. You, sir, are out of order. All right, I'm going to start with this one because it seems like it might be the first one. Andrew says, it seems that there are some similarities here with Catholic social teaching, yet elsewhere I have been told Marx says work is morally illicit, while Catholic social teaching stipulates that work is for the common good. Andrew continues, yes, work cannot go without proper leisure, understood in the sense of Joseph Piper, had along with the rest of the Catholic intellectual tradition. Is a true understanding of leisure missing from the critical theory paradigm? All right, so
that's good questions there. Yeah,
frenemy stuff, right? Like where can we agree? Where do we have to part company? Because I mean, we certainly have to part company at some point with somebody like Marcuse, right? The question is, not to just reject him in knee-jerk fashion, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I think so. Marx does think ultimately the good life would be liberated from servile labor entirely, right? Okay. And so does Aristotle, right? Okay. Now, but Aristotle does not think that is like achievable, right? Okay. That it's a politically, like you'll have a society where there is no servile labor, right? And this is where like Marxism gets spooky, right? Okay. Now, in its better versions, it's like, well, everybody will take a turn doing the servile stuff, but no one will be relegated to it by their station in life or something like that. Others, it seems like it's just going to be this like paradise, right? It's going to be like literally heaven on earth and stuff like that. Okay. And so, but so the church will say there is a dignity to labor as such. Okay. But in as much as it's an expression, though, of real human ingenuity and real humanity, do you see that? Like the church is never
and considerations of just wage and all that, right?
Just wage and all that, So but the church does say, if my understanding, I'm not the biggest social teaching guy in the church, okay, but like not that I'm for, I've not done a deep dive, right? But it's not just that like one needs to be compensated fairly for their labor, but like labor, like certain types of labor can be inherently dehumanizing.
Yes, of course.
Right.
Yeah, okay. like sex work, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sex work, or I think like even certain types of just factory labor, you know, that just reduces you to an extension of the machine, right? Okay. Now, I don't think that you're just saying like that's immoral, it shouldn't happen, but it is not the human ideal, right?
And here's an important thing I think to keep in consideration, especially when it comes to trying to draw neat lines on things like that, is I don't think that there can be neat lines drawn, right? But here's a common thing for people to keep in mind is you don't have to be able to draw neat lines to understand when something is far off the line, right?
Right.
And like that's an obvious. I got in a conversation with somebody over the weekend about just wages, and I'm like, look, I don't know what exactly the just wage is in every situation, but I don't have to know when it's an obscenely unjust wage.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Or like I don't have to know like what specific type of work is like what all of them are that are dehumanizing, to recognize a truly dehumanizing type of labor when I see it, right?
But I do think that like the is it Andrew, right? Andrew's questions is brings out an important point, because like the kind of the American version of the Protestant work ethic, right, where there's just this inherent value of somebody having done honest labor for an honest wage, right? Okay, even if that labor was itself, you know, completely something that like we could have trained a chimp to do, right? Okay, there's still a dignity in it, and that this person submitted themselves to it for the sake of the good of a family or to the commons or something like that. Do you see what I mean? Like that's a part of like the Catholic view of things,
right? Yeah, but it's
absent
done
from Marxism,
and it's done. Yeah, here's where we have to, I think, get a little bit subtle from that, right? Is like obviously if somebody, a man, loves his wife, his kids, and says, yeah, I'm going to go do some work that maybe I don't think is the most enjoyable stuff in the world. I don't, whatever that is. Painting or something like that, right? Some fences, fine, right? It's not certainly an evil form of work, but it's not the most exciting, right? But he makes that sacrifice for the good of his family. We say, that is a really good, dignified thing. However, the sort of pure, the kind of, you know, I don't want to be too polemical here, but this sort of Protestant work ethic that is now like that forgot its Christian roots and has just become like the hustle and grind American culture.
Okay. There's that like this worship of
work, right? Worship of the hustle and the grind, and people just sell books called like Hustle and Grind now, right? It's like and it's like literally
I'm
like
a grinder, man. I'm a
grinder, and like no, you're not. You're just not, right?
Because you loathe yourself.
Right? And then like making that the ultimate end, and like and what also happens with that is it's often at the expense of somebody's family, right? So it's like kids need you. And you're just like a workaholic, right? Because you just think that that you'll be able to buy the jets or some idiotic thing like that someday, and so you make that your end. Like clearly, that is it's vicious, right?
What I meant though is that there is this maybe mythic, right, possibility in that Protestant work ethic that says what that person is doing by their servile labor, right, for the sake of some greater commons, right, is dignified in and of itself, right? Do you see what I mean? The Marxist doesn't see it that way. They only see it in terms of exploitation.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that person would be better to be relieved of that.
Right.
Right. And I think that is to see the world through far too jaundiced a lens.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, and also to like just ignore the fact that like that might be that person's most dignified possibility too.
Right. And again, like this is where human anthropology comes into place, right? Is what is the end of human? Well, if it's to become holy, and they have many opportunities for increasing in holiness and building moral character in that, then like that could be a really good thing for that person ultimately in terms of whole person flourishing, right? Even if like these temporary material conditions aren't like the nicest, right?
And I think this is one of the things that the classical Marxist and the critical theory people both miss, right? Is like, at least with respect to like actual hands-on working people, is like my dad didn't want to be liberated from being a mailman. He wanted to be a damn good mailman.
And
right?
a damn good dad, right?
And a damn good dad, and these were all wound up together.
Yeah,
and he didn't want to become bourgeois. He didn't want that, right? Okay, and he didn't want to be told that he wanted that.
Yeah,
he just wanted to be properly rewarded for his damn hard good work he was doing.
Yeah, dude, it sounds sounds like my grandfather. They're probably about the same age, right?
Yeah.
And he worked for Pico, Philadelphia Electric.
Yep.
Drawing maps. He liked it, right? But really, what he really liked was and like this was the closest to anything that might be eligible for a saint in my family, right? A man that just did what he needed to do because he loved his family.
Yep.
Definitely didn't want to. Right. In fact, he had an opportunity to try out for the Phillies and probably, from my understanding, like had a decent chance, but gave it up because he was married and just wanted to go do the Philadelphia Electric thing. Did that, worked hard, really hard for, 60 years, retired somewhat early, went to church, got to, live the kind of whole life. So yeah, he would have nothing to do with any of this business, right? He would think it's insulting, frankly. Right. Yeah.
And I think this is something like people miss about like the really, really hard far out there Marxist left is it's not an admiration for the working class. It's a pity for the working class. And that's different.
Yeah, it's very condescending for sure. Yeah. And I think that's that was Lindsay's main criticism, right? Where he could see it only as condescending, but not see any of the legitimacy in the critiques either, right?
Right.
There is definitely a condescension here. There's no doubt about that, right? Yes. But that doesn't mean that all the critiques are off. Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't mean that like we haven't all been bought off with empty, cheap, crappy goods, right? Which is my thing. I think Lindsay just doesn't see.
Yeah, but I'll go back to my grandfather, right? Because he was, and like maybe his Catholicism helped afford this, but he didn't care about the Ford Mustang.
But
he didn't care about the cheap goods. He had his little tin of cashews, right?
Yeah.
And would enjoy the occasional baseball game on television. But other than that, he just liked going to church and being with his family. Right? That was it. So like, it's not an inevitable, like he wasn't like, again, but the guy I bring up with the Ford Mustang, it's funny you mentioned this. He was literally my grandfather's next door neighbor.
Right?
Yeah. Literally my grandfather's next door neighbor that I brought up with that. So,
hey, I'll tell you what, if you get to a point in your life where all you care about is the tin of cashews and time with your family, you are liberated, man.
Pretty good. And you know what?
Liberated.
And he could have done without those cashews, I'm sure. But you know what?
And if
man's got to have a little enjoyment every now and then, right? Salted roasted cashews.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong with that.
I'm with you.
Yeah, brother. All right, great stuff. One more comment here from Catholic Bases. Here, he would like to hear a take on Leviathan by Hobbes. What do you think, Jim? Should we squeeze that in at some point?
I'm teaching Hobbes next semester, so it's low hanging fruit for me.
All right. Well, you know what? Maybe we'll just ride that wave next semester then.
No, this is something because that book is 100 miles of bad road on Leviathan, right? But everyone reads the first part, and no one reads the whole book.
It's like it's like Dante, right? Everybody
like Dante,
reads,
Kant's critique, right? Yeah, first critique, and I tell you that like that book. He's got his whole kind of like materialist version of Christianity in there. He's got all sorts of weird things on like how he accounts for miracles and scripture and stuff. There's some very interesting stuff in Leviathan that no one ever really digs into. Yeah.
But we will dig into it here.
Yeah, definitely.
For the people. All right, sweet, Jim. Any announcements before
we go? Here we read the damn book.
We read the damn book. What do you want to announce aside from read chapter 3?
Hey, check out the podcast on classical theism.
Yeah.
Right. It not for my sake, but for John's sake. I think he's doing really, really good work over there. So please check it out and support it.
And you might want to listen to because I was on an episode before responding to some atheist fellow, and I cited Jim's work, and that sort of inspired.
That's what started it all. Yeah,
that's what started it all.
Yeah, John's like, that can't be right.
Yeah, John, and John's really, and that's why you said John's really good about this. Like, if a response doesn't satisfy him, he'll push you, right? Which is what we should all be doing in intellectual honesty, right? But no, Jim's response is very good, and it just made me think we need to just sit down and do a patient introductory episode on philosophy.
We really should. Yeah, just so we can refer to those positions as like the common nomenclature on this podcast, right?
Right, 100%.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right.
And also, there's one of the amounts. Oh yeah, there's on my website. I do have a blog post about the techno apocalypse at the orthodontist office, which is very relevant to what we talked about today with Marcuse. So you might have a look at that. Right?
JDMadden.com.
And I am going to the orthodontist office tomorrow with my son again. So hey, who knows what that might stir in me.
Stay tuned,
Stay tuned,
gentle listeners, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.